Motion carries.
Thank you very much. So motion to open the public hearing.
Is there a motion to open public hearing?
Just if you could please give the address, I think that would be prudent. This is 252931 Ridge Avenue / Park Ridge Gardens. Is that?
Yes, number 4.
Is that the motion?
Continuation of public hearing.
Oh, thank you very much.
Sorry.
You're precisely correct. So there is no
Okay.
need to open the public hearing. It's already open. Thank you.
Ryan Carter.
All right, thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. Ryan Carbon for the applicant. This matter was last heard before you on December 22nd, 2017. You had a number of questions for us at that time. You asked us to clarify whether we were seeking variances with respect to the relationship between the building height and the space between the buildings, as well as to provide you with plans that delineated the conditions more properly. I know if the board members have plans. I do have additional copies on this. Also in that time, we did receive a general municipal law review from the Rockland County Department of Planning. Did you get my response to that?
Let me look through the...
So we have, just to aid the board in evaluating that, we do have a letter from me dated February 27, 2018, which goes item by item through the GML review, notes those items on which we were requesting an override, gives you a reason that we're requesting that override, as well as notes the items on which we're not requesting an override. In the case of this particular letter, I would note that the reason for the review is to address the regional and countywide planning concerns based on the project's proximity to the town of Ramapo. Yeah, sure. But if you go through the letter itself, it doesn't actually state that there are any impacts on the town of Ramapo, so I'm not sure what their analysis is about. Nonetheless, with respect to items 11 through 15 and 17 through 21, we don't seek any overrides, and we can go through the items in the GML if you desire, or it's really more of a tool for you to have in the record to be able to have substantive reasons. I would note that the units permitted by acre in this particular R3 project is 18 units an acre. We are proposing 14 units an acre with respect to the density. Each building is going to contain 7 units, and you see the parking lined up on Park, as well as on the north side of the property, as indicated. You also see this is a planning board project as well. The zero net runoff that needs to be complied with. We have shown the dry wells. We have provided you with architectural renderings, which the board found attractive the last time, as well as with sample architectural plans and unit layouts. It is a lot which slightly exceeds the minimum lot area requirement. 40,000 square feet is required, and we exceed that. We also exceed the lot width requirements on both the Park side and the Ridge side. We are seeking some relief with respect to the front yards on both of those streets as well. I would note that we exceed the side yard requirement. We are below the maximum building height requirement. We comply with the parking. We are fewer units per acre than is permitted by code, and we are seeking a variance of section 255-22-01 with respect to the space between the buildings. We do provide a appropriate aisle width for the parking. You'll see concrete walks, which are an improvement, which is shown upon the plan. So we appreciate the generally favorable comments that we have received. Again, this is an application which is submitted here by right in the R3 zoning district. I'm applying the balancing test, which is the benefit of the applicant versus the detriment to the community. Question number 1 being whether this is consistent with the character of the surrounding area on Ridge and Park, which, as we do know, has quite a view from the apartments on the South Cole, right around the corner, to the other multifamily apartments on Ridge itself. Obviously, this is consistent with the dominantly multifamily character neighborhood of the quadrant in which you find it. You can see that from the lots there and the construction depicted there. With respect to adverse off-site environmental impacts, as you can see from the proposed dry wells that are interconnected and shown on the map before you. We have submitted drainage, and we will comply with the village's requirements for zero net runoff, and we also provide the required number of on-site parking spaces. Evaluating the variances themselves in their totality, with respect to most of the categories of the area variances, we actually exceed the requirements. There are a number of, including the lot area itself. I would emphasize again that we are below the permitted density in the R3 zone with this proposal. We are deficient in some respects with respect to a few of our area variances in the front, as well as a 3-foot deficiency in the rear yard. But evaluating their totality, particularly where you have greater than the required lot area, where you have 33% more than the required lot width on both sides. On the whole, this is not an application which stretches the bulk variances very greatly, and it would be difficult to sustain a finding based on this bulk table that the variances requested in and of themselves are extensive. So we believe this is consistent with the nature of the construction permitted in the zone, use permitted by right. We've made every effort to minimize the variances because of the way we need to have our ingress and egress on the property. There's really not an alternative layout that we have found to be feasible. All the buildings will comply with the applicable fire code requirements. We comply with all of the on-site parking. And so therefore, with respect to the relatively minor variances that we're seeking, we'd appreciate the board look favorably upon our application.
Has this undergone secret review by the planning board?
Yes, it has, sir.
Has it issued a negative declaration?
Yes, it has. And we were here and began our presentation before this board in December.
Okay. One second. There were some comments last time. Some comments from the board.
There was a question from the board with respect to whether we were seeking a variance pursuant to section 255-22-01 with respect to the distance between the buildings. That needed to be clarified. The difference between the buildings is 20 feet, and we are seeking relief from that requirements of the code, which would put the distance between those buildings so far apart as to make the construction impracticable. So we are seeking relief from that. I don't have any other specific questions. I think the buildings obviously will be sprinkled per code. That's required as multifamily. And there's a play area that's designated on the western side of the property.
Two structures on one lot. Is that also one of the requests?
It says on our bulk table, variance required 2 principal buildings.
Okay. Any other comments?
And again, pursuant to note 7 on our map, that information regarding the plot review, approval, and details are available in the Spring Valley Planning Board file, so it is appropriately cross-referenced.
Okay. The comments from
It's quite lengthy. I believe it's important to read the county GML. I'll read it very quickly. There are copies available.
And then we would ask if that's going to be read. We would ask that our response be read in as well.
Of course. All correspondence that's submitted is read into the record. It's the Rockland County Planning Department dated February 5, 2018. It is 5 pages long, and it is signed by Douglas J. Schutz, Acting Commissioner of Planning, and it reads in substance: disapprove. 1, the site plan submitted for review is deficient in many ways. Proposed and existing structures and features are both shown in a similar manner, making it difficult to distinguish between them. Multiple lot lines are shown. There are lines that presumably indicate units within each building whose significance is unclear. Curb cuts and access ways to parking spaces are not shown. It is not clear what the boxes between the southern building and Park Avenue are meant to signify. The two buildings are not labeled. Setbacks are not shown. Most significantly, the site plan has not been stamped by the engineer. In addition to the deficiencies in the submitted site plan, the proposal itself presents multiple serious concerns. The following comments will provide more information regarding each specific issue in summary. This department has concerns about vehicles and pedestrian safety, whether the proposal is compliant with requirements for lot size, floor area ratio, and flood regulations, and the general overdevelopment of the site. When considered cumulatively, This department is forced to conclude that it's impossible to resolve these issues through minor adjustments. A wholesale revision of the project is necessary. This application must be denied. I think with Dennis Michaels speaking now, not reciting from the letter, I think it would be more efficacious if we also read from Mr. Carbon's comments addressing the county, side by side, rather than reading the whole county letter and then Brian's letter. Did you address number one, Mr. Carbon, I guess?
Yes, where it says, with regard to this approval.
Okay. So, reading now from Ryan Carbon's letter to the zoning board dated February 27, 2018. It's 2 pages, signed by Mr. Carbon. And it reads, this office is applicant to is counsel to the applicant, etc. As part of the zoning board of appeals review, it considers a February 5, 2018 review conducted by the Rock County Department of Planning, purportedly pursuant to sections 239 L and M of the General Municipal Law. The statutory purposes of said reviews to address regional and countywide planning concerns based on the project's impacts on the town of Arapahoe. No such impacts on are noted. Notwithstanding the foregoing, said review addresses area outside the permitted of scope of the said review that is reserved to the exclusive jurisdiction of the zoning board of appeals, or the planning board is applicable, including, amongst other things, outside the balancing test required to be applied by the zoning board of appeals and therefore impermissible for consideration. Notwithstanding the foregoing, the applicant does not seek an override of any of the comments addressed 11 through 15 and 17 through 21 contained in the review. With respect to the disapproval in comments 1 and 2, we request an override for similar reasons. This is a use permitted by right in a zone consistent with the density and style of homes in the neighborhood and identical relief granted by the board on other properties on the same block. Sufficient on-site parking is provided, zero net runoff will be complied with, and there is adequate public water and sewer capacity. The applicant will pay any sewer impact fee. All the proposed setbacks are shown on the plan, which is sufficient for the board's review. While 16 units per acre are permitted, only 14 units per acre are proposed. As such, these comments and requests do not accurately reflect the character of the community and should be overridden. All right, so you address comment 1, Mr. Carmen?
Disapproval in comments 1 and 2.
Now, you're accepting modifications from the county, numbers 11 through 15, correct? I think that's what you're saying in your letter.
That's correct.
So 11, 12, 13, 14, and 15 are accepted by the applicant, and 17 through 21 you are also accepting, correct?
Yes, sir.
21. If I may suggest that I not read those because the applicant is accepting those modifications from the county planning department, and they must be made conditions of any approval that this board may be considering granting. Okay? So moving on to number 2, I'm back to the county planning department's GML letter of February 5, 2018. Number 2 reads, permitting development that does not comply with the applicable bulk standards can set an undesirable land use precedent and result in the overutilization of individual sites. The front yards for Park Avenue and Ridge Avenue are 33% and 37% less than the minimum standard, respectively. The rear yard is 6% deficient of the minimum standard. The proposed floor area is 37% greater than the maximum standard. The ability of existing infrastructure to accommodate increased residential density on undersized parcels is a countywide concern and must be evaluated. This evaluation must consider whether local roads will become more congested and the sewer system, stormwater management systems, and the public water supply will be overburdened. The village must consider the cumulative and regional impacts of permitting such development. 3, the proposed structure does not comply with section 255-22H of the village zoning regulations, which prohibits impediments to visibility at intersections. This is an unacceptable hazard to motorists and pedestrians. The building must be reconfigured to comply with this section of the regulations, and the number of units and size of the building reduced to better comply with the zoning ordinance. Now, back to Mr. Carbon's February 27 letter, and Mr. Carbon, responding to comment number 3 from the county planning department, reads, there is already a stop sign at the intersection. Moreover, the 20 inches provided is sufficient.
20 feet.
20 feet. Correction by Mr. Carbon. Moreover, the 20 feet provided is sufficient to avoid inhibiting effective vehicular and pedestrian movements. As such, this comment should be overridden. County Planning Department letter, back to that, February 5, comment number, or modification number 4 reads, the proposed structures appear to be in violation of section 255-22O of the village zoning regulations, which states that distance between buildings shall be no less than the height of the buildings. No specific height or distance between buildings were given on the site plan. However, there appears to be approximately 20 feet between the two buildings, which is less than the height of the proposed three-story buildings. The site plan must be reconfigured, the number of units and building size reduced, or the variance application amended to include this requirement. If the variance is amended, the public hearing notice must be reissued. And Mr. Carbon's letter of February 27 responds to the county's modification number 4 with: the applicant is seeking variances from section 255.2.0 of the Spring Valley Code. As such, this comment should be overridden. Dennis Michael speaking now. Was it published that way, Ryan? Did the notice?
Well, I don't do the publishing.
I know, all right. Maybe you're very knowledgeable about your application, you might know.
Yes, I am not knowledgeable about those things I don't do. I'm barely knowledgeable about those things that I do.
Was it published, was it publicly noticed for this variance? The 255.20, Laurie, Walter,
Yes.
anybody?
Whatever was put on the application was copied onto the edge along with the variances that were taken off the bulk tables on the plan.
All I know is the sealed plan does have the distance between buildings, section 255-2201 listed in the penultimate column of the bulk table.
Okay, sounds like the variance was requested as shown on the plan. Sorry. All right, back to the county planning department's letter of February 5, GML letter. And we're now on comment number 5, modification number 5, I should say. The western end of the site is within the, right, we're on 5, modification 5. The western end of the site is within the A floodplain designated by FEMA. The extent of the floodplain must be shown on the site plan. Calculations of lot area adjustment must be provided as required by section 255-18A of the village zoning regulations. As the unadjusted lot area is only 932 square feet larger than the minimum required of 40,000 square feet, it is highly likely that the adjusted lot area will fall below the standard. If the adjusted lot area of the property requires amending the variance application, the public hearing notice must be reissued and a revised application sent to this department for review. Now to Mr. Carbon's February 27 letter to the ZBA, and he addresses the county's modification number 5 with: the floodplain designation no longer pertains to this parcel. As such, this comment should be overridden. I'm asking Building Inspector Booker, is you in agreement with that?
I listened, but I wasn't thinking you were addressing it.
Is it in the floodplain?
This might border a floodplain, yes.
Was it any part of
The
the
county said it is in the floodplain. We said that it's no longer in the floodplain, and that they should therefore override the comment.
I do know that there is a floodplain there. I don't think that it could be no longer. That's the floodplain that runs from the property adjacent to 59 to the south past Park Avenue. It's very narrow. It's a zone. It doesn't mean that it's not a floodplain. It means no base flood elevations have been determined.
Well, we don't seem to have a resolution on
I would assume that the floodplain administrator would need to render a determination as to whether it would be in the floodplain.
Who's on floodplain? Is that Mike Walker?
No, it's him.
So,
I'd have to examine the flood map.
all right. Guess we'll have to continue the application just for that item. Maybe there's others. All right, back to the county planning department. GML letter dated February 5, and modification number 6 reads: the bulk table incorrectly indicates the minimum lot area for this use is 20,000 square feet, not 40,000 square feet. Also lists the maximum units per acre as 16.9918, and the proposed number of units per acre as 14, not 14.9. The scale is also given incorrectly as 1 inch equals 10 feet, while the correct scale is 1 inch equals 20 feet. These items must be corrected. Following comments reflect, that's the next one. And Mr. Carbon's February 27 letter responding to the county's modification number 6 is: this correction has been made. As such, this comment should be overridden. We need verification of that.
Yeah, the map is revised dated February 26, 2018, and if you look at it, you'll see those corrections have been made.
I would ask Building Inspector Walter, just, there's the county's.
I handed you one.
really for the building inspector review plans, but, Walter, can you look at the plans and confirm that, what is it, Ryan, that,
On the
the
scale
bulk table has to show the minimum lot area to be what? Not,
40,000 square foot in an R3 zone for multifamily. The required is correct, 40,000 square foot.
okay, so you fixed that. The maximum units per acre is 16.9.
That's if they're going, 18 is what's allowed, there's just below an acre.
But does it show the maximum now is 18? Okay. The proposed number of units per acre is 14, not 14.9, so they're proposing 14, not 14.9?
Correct.
Okay. And the scale, did you correct the scale, 1 inch equals 10 feet?
According
No, that's incorrect, it should be 1 inch equals 20 feet.
that's correct.
He's got that correct? Okay, sounds like it's all been correct. Thank you very much, Building Inspector Booker, appreciate that. So next is from the county's February 5 GML letter, modification number 7. The following comments reflect our additional concerns about this proposal. 7, the application and the site plan indicate that the proposed structures will have 3 stories and a floor area ratio of 0.82. However, architectural drawing A1 by Artistic Building Design Studio dated June 9, 2017 gives the total floor area of one of the buildings as 20,503 square feet. If both buildings have the same floor area, the combined floor area of 41,006 square feet would result in a floor area ratio of 1.00. In addition, the site plan shows a total building footprint of approximately 17,360 square feet. 17,360 square feet, assuming each store will have gross floor area equal to the footprint. The proposed structures will have an overall gross floor area of approximately 52,080 square feet. This would result in a floor area ratio of 1.27. Although this is an estimate, a floor area ratio of 1.27 is 55% greater than the proposed floor area ratio of 0.82. The magnitude of this discrepancy requires further attention. The applicant must positively demonstrate that the proposed structures match the proposed floor area ratio. Floor area ratio calculation must be provided on the site plan. If the floor area ratio exceeds 0.82, the variance application must be amended. The public hearing notice must be reissued. Any application that is revised due to an increase in floor area ratio must be sent to this department for review. Mr. Carbon's February 27 response to the county's modification number 7 is the county's interpretation of the Spring Valley Code is incorrect. The basement is not counted towards the floor area ratio calculation, and the authority to interpret the code lies with the local building inspector. As such, this comment should be overridden. Building Inspector Booker, do you have any?
Basements do not count towards FAR if they are 7'6" or less, and partially or wholly below grade in a single or 2-family home. It counts for everything else.
Okay, so would you agree with Mr. Carbon's response to the county's comment number 7 about the floor area ratio? They're raising some questions about the calculation of the floor area ratio. I don't know if you were...
I wasn't privy to it, I didn't see the GML, but just to reiterate, everything counts in an FAR for multifamily. Singles and twos, the basement does not count at 7'6".
Does this application include the basement in its floor area ratio calculation?
Well, I would imagine it would be, it would have to if it's a multifamily.
Did it, Ryan, if you know? Okay.
Their townhouse, I did not make an independent FAR calculation other than Mr. Salentano on his representation. I would have to go through the math with him, I don't
I
know.
understand that. Like me, we're not engineers or architects or surveyors. All right, just if you could, Building Inspector Booker, can you just look at the county, not now, since I think there's one other modification number that we're asking you to look at as the flood administrator. So could you also look at...
Yeah, what I think that perhaps some of the confusion is post-approval, what happens with projects like this is these will all be separated into separate condominium tax lots, point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, point 5. So they no longer are, they're not multifamily apartment buildings, they're individually owned townhome units because you can't buy the whole building. So the calculation of the FAR, as I understand it, is based upon that, because that's what the certificates of occupancy are going to be issued for. A certificate of occupancy is not being issued for apartment building with 7 units. Each of those are CO'd on a separate basis, and they become separate tax lots.
I'll defer to the building
So
inspector.
that's my understanding of how that calculation gets made.
Walter, if you could please look at...
Well, just so you know, a townhome is defined as 3 or more units adjacent to each other, directly connected from basement to roof. on independent fee simple lots,
Correct.
all right? A townhome is a single family. If you're condoing the units and you own sheetrock to sheetrock, you don't have fee simple lots from ground to roof.
All right, I'm not sure if that addresses comment, or modification number 7, but I will leave it to the zoning board if they feel they need more, you know, it's modification number 7 of the county is up to you guys whether or not you want to override it for the reasons given by Mr. Carbon and Building Inspector Booker. And number 8 from the county reads, modification number 8, all sidewalk, stairs, decks, window wells, entrances, terraces, and porches, and dumpster/refuse containment areas must be shown on the map to ensure that there is sufficient access to the building for firefighting purposes and to demonstrate that they will not impact yard requirements or parking maneuverability. If any such features expand the building envelope of the principal structures, such as the terraces or porches, the variance application must be amended, the public hearing notice reissued, and subsequently reviewed by this department. Mr. Carpenter's February 27 response to county modification number 8 is, and also he's responding to county modification number 9, so I'll read that as well. County February 5 GML modification number 9 reads, parking spaces 1 through 8 along Park Avenue will require drivers to back out of their spaces into the street across multiple curb cuts. This is an unacceptable hazard to pedestrians and motorists and an impediment to the safe flow of traffic. The parking spaces must be reconfigured to minimize the number of points of ingress/egress and provide a turnaround for motorists. And again, Mr. Carbon's February 27 response to county modifications 8 and 9 is, the final site plan will show these items. As such, this comment should be overridden. So it sounds like you're accepting those modifications 8 and 9 because you're gonna comply with them,
Yeah,
correct?
they're just outside, you know, there's no variance that's being sought with respect to anything relating to the parking. Everything relating to how the site circulation, everything else needs to be dealt with by the planning board at final site plan approval. We're not seeking waivers with respect to the number of spaces. We are seeking a variance for parking in front yard. But we will line everything out and make sure that there's satisfactory flow at the time of final site plan approval. It doesn't speak to, one of the challenges that we have in addressing the county GMLs and, you know, their professional planners, so they look at everything at a site, but not everything that they have an opinion about is something that the zoning board is entitled to necessarily have an opinion about or act upon. So what I've tried to do in my response is to delineate those issues which we can resolve here and correct here, and those issues which are the jurisdiction of the planning board. I fully trust the county will issue their letter when we have our final site plan approval, and they'll need to be addressed. There at that time. But I often have a problem when I go back to the planning board and I get into planning issues over here, and then I get over there and they say, well, why are you talking to me about this? You know, that's not where this. So I try to kind of stay out of the crossfire between the boards and deal with the issues that speak to the variances. I try to speak to over here, and issues that deal with the site in a more holistic fashion or environmental fashion or drainage on the site or landscaping on the site, which are fundamentally planning board issues in terms of the way responsibility is divided up under state law and under the village code. I try to keep over there.
Understood.
Not disrespectful to the comments in any way, but, you know, everybody can't do everything.
Understood. County modification number 10 of the February 5 GML letter reads, the specific height of the proposed building must be provided in the bulk table so that it can be determined if an aerial apparatus road is required. Mr. Carbon's February 27 response to modification number 10 is, this has been corrected as such. This comment should be overridden.
Yeah, we amended our bulk table. We show heights less than 40 feet because of the dimensional requirements of the lot. No aerial apparatus road is required. We have the sprinklering, etc. So that issue is resolved.
Can I make a suggestion? For those county modifications that you corrected and that we confirmed were corrected, why don't you just accept those modifications rather than asking the board to override them, since they've already been corrected, and to make them conditional?
Because I'll tell you why. I'll tell you why.
Like the bulk table, that's a zoning board matter.
The reason is because the county places a great burden upon the applicant to demonstrate that even if they are off by a comma or a period, that the relevant land use board was aware of it. And so I would rather seek an override and place my reasons in the record. And if I'm being too careful, then I've been too careful. But I would rather be too careful than not careful enough.
I just raising the suggestion.
So it would be less work for me, but I want to make sure that my clients are protected. That's my job.
Okay, with regard to So what I suggest is if you are inclined to approve this application, whether it's this evening or a future meeting, that the conditions, the modifications of the county that have been corrected by the applicant, so therefore no longer relevant, I suppose, you just make that note in your motion, that you're overriding modification number 6, for example, because it has been corrected, it has been satisfied by the applicant. Just a simple note to that effect.
Bob, I do think, and obviously we'll get to the public hearing with respect to those issues where there may be an opinion that's required to be rendered by the floodplain administrator. Obviously, any decision here, this board doesn't have the authority to override the floodplain administrator, so to the extent that there would be anything further action by that required, obviously we consent to it being subject to any such review.
So okay. So the comment from the modification from the county, number 16, reads, the floodplain administrator of the village of Spring Valley shall certify that proposed construction is in compliance with the floodplain regulations of the village and the Federal Emergency Management Agency. I would agree with Mr. Carbon that the applicant must comply with the flood, whatever the chapter is called here, the village flood damage prevention or the floodplain chapter has to be complied with by the applicant.
I can't get relief from that.
Right, the floodplain, and Mr. Carbon's response to modification number 16 is the floodplain designation no longer contains this parcel. As such, this comment should be overridden. But as with another modification, Walter, reminding you to please look into the floodplain question.
I have the note. I can't confirm whether or not it complies until I have full architectural drawings as well anyway. So it's kind of premature.
All right, so we still have to go to final planning. At site plan, that will obviously need to be resolved.
All right, so number 10, I think modification number 10 from the county's February 5 GML letter, we didn't read that one. The specific height of the proposed building must be provided in the bulk table so that it can be determined if an aerial apparatus road is required. And your response, Mr. Cooper?
My response, as I stated, was that we corrected our bulk table, that it's less than 40 feet, and because of the sprinkling and the layout of the lots, an aerial apparatus road is not required.
And as you indicated earlier in your February 27 correspondence, you're accepting county GML February 5 letter. Modifications number 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21. So that...
Yes, we accept all of those modifications without comment.
That concludes the county's February 5 GML letter. Next, a very, very brief Rockland County Health Center for Environmental Health, or Health Department, dated February 1, 2018, one page, signed by Elizabeth Mello, P.E., Senior Public Health Engineer, and it reads in substance, 1, site plans are to be submitted so that it can be determined if additional approvals from this department are required. 2, should the board require a stormwater management system to remediate the increase in impervious coverage, this application is to be made to the Rockland County Department of Health for review of the system for compliance with the county mosquito code. And we have the same letter from the Town of Clarkstown Planning Department dated January 24, 2018, signed by Gilbert J. Heim, Chairman, which reads in substance, Clarkstown Planning Board does hereby find that proposed referrals will result in a significant overutilization of properties. These proposals will impact the community character, traffic, water quality, quality drainage, stormwater runoff, and sanitary sewer service. And from Kathy Tolf, sorry?
Nowhere in the property.
Okay, I'm just reading in the correspondence. So you're making note of that for the record. Thank you. Okay. Ms. Tolf's, Kathy Tolf's correspondence of February 26, 2018 reads, for 25, 29, 31 Ridge, I do not have a plot map, but if I recall correctly from the last hearing, the buildings are too close for fire apparatus, must be scaled down. This is a densely populated area already with problematic traffic which impacts fire operations. This project needs to shrink to accommodate the realities that surround it. That's it for correspondence.
Okay. Any other comments? Right.
I have nothing further, other than I would just remind the board that there is a site plan process that is going to continue to go through. And while we are here on these dimensional variances that are here tonight, the dimensional variances that are requested are not horribly significant, and I would note that we exceed the minimum lot area, that we exceed by 33% our fronts on both street, that we exceed, I believe, our side yard requirements. So I know the county does note that we need a 3% variance on the rear yard, and that there's a differentiation on the floor area ratio, but I think if you look at the bulk table in its entirety, The variance has been minimized to the extent possible, including that we are not seeking to build to the maximum permitted density.
Thank you. Any comments from the public?
Oh, absolutely. I've been waiting. You limit the attorneys on these cases? You limit us, they just go on and on and on.
I am just reading from the county planning department,
I
which is
didn't
a
say
very
you.
important
I'm
correspondence.
talking about the applicant.
Thank you.
I don't
They
believe
give
it.
us 2 minutes or 3 minutes, and then they go on for 10 and 15.
Happy to answer your questions. I think my presentation was about 5 minutes and about 20 minutes to answer questions.
Could you please hand us the visibility?
Why can't tell if you the clerk or what you are talking about? I, Vivian Street, solemnly affirm or attest that the testimony I'm about to give is the truth to the best of my ability and knowledge. So, Vivian Street, 55 Creekside Circle, Spring Valley, New York. So, my first question is, the entire presentation I heard 14 units, 2 buildings, and at the very end, I heard condominium. Wow. Are there any condominiums in that community? No. Hello? Are there any condominiums in that community? Since it's not going to disrupt the existing makeup of that area, are there community condos in that community? And who am I asking? You or the applicant? Okay, so do I get an answer now or do I have to wait?
No, we'll respond after you.
Okay, so my next question also is, what will be the cost of these condominiums? I like to stand here and wait, because I may have a rebuttal. Because it certainly is not the character of the existing community. That's a fact. So I want to know, are there condominiums on Ridge and Park? I know there are co-ops, and there's a whole bunch of rentals. And I want to know how much these condominiums, and will they be up for public sale?
You'll have a chance to respond to that.
Okay, thank you.
Any other comments from the public?
She said, no, I will.
See, my name is Charles Bradford, and I do solemnly affirm and attest that the testimony I'm about to give is true to the best of my knowledge.
Okay.
The question, well, questions plural for me. Does this zoning board on that Ridge Avenue know how many other R3 or R2 buildings or structures have been approved? That's the question, so I should just continue? All right. I just need a response. Thank you. I live on Ridge, so I'm aware of the structures that are being built. 30 West Funston and Ridge, 36, 38, proposed 37, proposed 13, 11, proposed R2. A lot of those were R2, but have been changed to R3. And that's the basis of my question. This particular request addressing, is it in a floodplain zone, I'm sure will be addressed. I looked at the variance for Park and for Ridge. It's 30 feet required and 19 proposed. And I know that across the street on Ridge, that a front yard variance was given for the approved synagogue. So my concern is that as you squeeze those buildings on a narrow street, that it's going to have an impact. I have not heard a traffic study, a fire report. Those things concern me. For the people who will move into those dwellings, as well as myself, that I live there, in that area. I know down the street there was an emergency one night, and there were at least 10 emergency vehicles, and from Funston to Singer, it was closed off that night. And that's a matter of record, and that's a fact. And they just mobilized that whole area. I have pictures of, it will have an adverse impact on that area. I have pictures of trees, at least 15 to 25 trees that have already been ripped out and moved away. And I think that as that happens, the variances encourage that that's okay. When you take away trees, that will impact water and a flood zone, or flooding. Large structures like this, where does the snow go? Where does the water go? A lot of the, I'm working on winding up, but I am going to finish. I'm going to finish because that's my house. I live there. And I live in Spring Valley, and I'm very concerned about the community, as this board is concerned about the community. And I'm just asking that the board not continue to, these kinds of things will polarize a community. And I'm asking to take that into consideration. The changes in that neighborhood, it will affect the quantity. There are more wiretaps going on. It results in environmental impact with trees, etc. Air quality will change. Traffic noise level is already maximum. Increase in potential erosion. So I'm not sure who and is responsible for developing a negative declaration if they could collectively look at a geographical area. An example would be Collins Avenue.
Oh, boy.
So I'm just saying, to ask this board to look at those areas, is that the model that you will follow? Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the public?
I, Stephen White, do solemnly affirm or attest that the testimony I'm about to give is the truth to the best of my ability and knowledge. Stephen White, 10 Garden Place. First thing, I want to ask a question about the floor area ratio. And in the agenda, it's printed that it's permitted to be 0.60 required and 0.82 proposed. But I heard there was some conversation about whether or not it was really 0.82 from the GML. They thought it was something else, including basements or not. So I'm wondering, is this the correct number, 0.82? Or what is the actual floor area ratio variance that they're requesting? Is it not known?
We'll get the answers.
Okay, so I had made some comments before about the plans and the notices and things being adequate in advance. And I think it's coming up again, you know, that I think that before something comes before this board, those kinds of numbers should be well known so that you all can study them and not make your decision based on something you just heard a minute ago. And the public also should have access to those things to consider. I try to do my homework. I didn't have time because I just got the agenda this afternoon on my lunch break, so I didn't really have time to go around. I don't know if any of the board members had time to go around and visit any of the properties. So I didn't have time. I went on to Google and I made some pictures of the local area that I'm going to leave with the clerk. And I noticed that, you know, there were comments about how the other properties in the area were developed similarly. But when I look at the properties directly next door to this proposal at number 23, what I get from the Google map is a little a house with a nice front lawn and a big tree in the yard right kind of on the border of where the new proposal is going to be at number 23. And then when I look across the street, there's a house with a huge setback, this great big large nice front lawn with various trees and a little house, which is kind of the characteristic of most of the neighborhood. And if you go across Park Avenue on the other side where the GML was talking about those parking spots that where they have to back up right onto the street there. Right now I see that there's other, you know, single family houses that are backing there. When they look across from their front lawn now, what they're seeing is trees. And so, you know, all of those trees in this picture, the third picture that I took, I guess are the ones that have maybe already been taken down. And from what I understood from another commenter, perhaps those houses have already been slated to be turned into something else, I don't know. But in either case, whoever's there, whatever it is, it's going to be close to the street, and directly across the street will be where the cars are parked, where they have to back up into that street. And so I think, you know, the GML was very accurate to talk about this in the zoning board because you're being asked to approve front yard parking. So, and that's the front yard parking is the one that's directly onto Ridge Avenue from the way I can see it. And that front yard parking doesn't have any area except to get out of that parking lot, except to back up onto Ridge Avenue, which is, as been previously noted, a through street where people used to cut through. Excuse me, not Ridge, Park Avenue, that people use to get through to Wolf Drive and then up above. So that particular area does have a lot of traffic of people using it as a shortcut, and there's going to be perhaps a house of worship across the street and then people backing up into the street right there. So it seems like setting this up to have people back up. And it's not really necessary because, you know, I mean, Mr. Carbon stated when he gave you his notes that he was trying to assist the ZBA. But then later on, he said that he was protecting his client's interest. So the ZBA knows, and a lot of you guys are into real estate, and so you know how much money is at stake here. And you know that the client's interest is he wants to make a profit and a big profit off of this thing. And you as the ZBA, I expect you to be representing the interests of the citizens and the village, and not the profit-making of the applicant, who has a right to make a profit. But we've over this particular project being so far over the FAR and pushing so far close to the street and asking for all of these variances, really this is a self-imposed restriction just for the sole reason of increasing their profit margin. And I don't think that the citizens have to pay again and again and again in terms of quality of life so that developers can increase their profit margin. And certainly exactly what the GML requested was to rewrite this whole thing and bring it back into something that will conform with the village's codes is entirely possible and something that they could do. I don't feel it's unreasonable to ask them to do it. I don't think the county was unreasonable to ask them to do it. And I think that this board would be very reasonable to agree with the county and say, take it back to the drawing board. Thank you.
Any other comments from the public? Seeing none. Ryan, any response?
May I respond again? May I?
We know each other, right?
Okay, we know. Too well and for too long, right? Or not well enough and not long enough. I guess we'll see how it plays out, right?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Ms. Street. I would make a number of points, and I appreciate the spirit in which the comments have been offered tonight. I would remind the board of a few things, and if there's unfinished business that we have and things we need to take a look at, of course we'll do that. But this isn't the R3 zone. The nature of the use is permitted by right. It is a denser residential zone than we find in the R1 and the R2. Notwithstanding that, I want to point out that the applicant is not building at the maximum permitted density. The applicant and the county clarified this for us, the applicant is building 20% below the permitted density. So when you weigh all these factors, you can't pull out a number and say, oh, well, you're exceeding the FAR, it's a bad project because you exceed the FAR by a certain amount. But then you have to credit the fact that you are lowering the density by a certain amount. The same way you can get upset at me that I'm short 6% of my rear yard, but I have an extra 33% on both of my front yards, and I have an extra 3% on my lot area itself, and an extra 5 feet on my side yard. So, no, it's very difficult to find, find perfect parcels with perfect construction. That if everything is fit neatly within all of those lines, that would be very nice. It's just not. It's not the nature of the way real estate works. It's not the nature of the way construction works. That said, obviously, we want to keep things within certain guidelines. With respect to the issue of the floodplain, as I have noted, we defer to whatever the outcome of the floodplain administrator's determination is, and any decision would need to be contingent upon that. An aerial apparatus road is not required. The property complies in all respects with the New York State building and fire code. With respect to the issues that were raised about ownership, this board well knows that the form of ownership of any real estate is an impermissible and unconstitutional consideration for a zoning board or a planning board to take into account when approving construction, just as it's impermissible to take into account exemption status and all those other kinds of things. Boards are not permitted to take into account of how a property is going to be owned or what its tax status would be in applying the balancing test. That is prohibited. Turning to the balancing test itself, looking at the multifamily nature of the community there, the apartments on in taller buildings on South Cole around the corner and all the other units over there. The apartment has a distinct multifamily flavor, and this is a use which is permitted by right in the zone. With respect to the site plan issues that were raised in the GML, obviously we will address all of those in turn. With respect to satisfying the concerns of the fire department, we understand that is a legitimate condition of approval as well. So, that nothing is proposed here that's desired to be polarizing in any way. We're happy to continue to. I think we have satisfactorily addressed the issues that have been raised. It is difficult sometimes to sift through those substantive issues that we need to work through, as well as the kind of ad hominem baseless opposition to things, as you have a letter from Clarkstown, which wasn't asked to comment on the matter. It isn't near their board or has absolutely nothing to do with them, but they feel compelled to give you a lecture about how you should do your job. And so what I've tried to do is kind of separate comments like that, to which I don't think the board should really accord any weight. People are just against everything, not in my backyard, no, 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 as opposed to those comments which help us work through some of the relevant issues and give us a better project as a result. And as always, I'm happy to work through those issues with you, and if there are issues that we haven't satisfactorily addressed tonight, if you could please identify them for me, I'm happy to continue to work with you on that process.
How about reference of the FAR? Can you address that?
So again, our FAR was calculated by Mr. Celentano. He sealed it, he stamped it. I understand that's based on conversations that his office and the applicant had with the building inspector. I was not party to any of those conversations. I rely on that. I have no additional information on the FAR other than what's on the map.
To that end, being that you discussed FAR and applicant said they'd like to tie up any loose ends, I looked at Mr. Celentano's drawing just now, and I noticed that the scale was incorrect. So I said, let me go and check. I did some measurements of the footprint, and the footprint of an individual building, according to what I've calculated here on a scale, is a little over 8,800 square foot. So together, the two footprints are a little over 17,000 square foot. If we're considering 3 stories, based on the bulk table, that's 53,000 square foot, which exceeds a 40,000 square foot lot. It would be prudent for the village zoning board, being that I make zoning decisions and you're the only ones that can override them, to consider FAR, whether a basement is going to count or not. If it's 2 stories, then it goes down to 34,000 square foot versus a 40,000 square foot lot. But just to prevent a log jam in the future, I think it should be addressed and we should be cognizant of this.
Any questions from the board?
I have a couple of questions. Someone asked earlier, they didn't ask, not that Mr. Carver's obligated to answer, the size of these, not only the size of these units, but the use that who's going to be purchasing. And clearly on your plans, you're showing Passover kitchens and you're showing baker's kitchens.
That's why they said
And I think that doesn't necessarily speak to the general population. They asked if there were specific people who were going to purchase these condos, or if they were open for the public to purchase. And that was not addressed.
Every condominium offered for sale in the state of New York by law needs to be available to anybody who wishes to buy it, pursuant to an offering plan that gets filed with the Attorney General.
Okay, thank you.
Plenty of ordinances that deal with that, and they should all be vigorously enforced.
Well, there were several other questions that were asked earlier that were also not addressed. More important is the report from the county. I do not believe that we are at the point now where we can make a determination. I think prior to that, this board would probably want to have a finding, because there was quite a bit of information that was exchanged here. And I'm not an engineer, architect, or attorney, and I would like to have some further interpretation of what is and what isn't. And as well as you probably want to get clarification on what Mr. Booker just brought to our attention regarding footage. That's just what I would.
Any other board members?
Next question is Mr. Booker.
Yeah.
Did you get a chance to take a look at this 21 items of GMLA law?
No, I have not seen that email.
Would you like to take a look at it and make recommendations in the future? So, because you just checked 1 and 2 and you found a couple of items already, which is not correctly.
What's the date on that?
February 5.
Okay. Yes, I'll read that.
I think it would be better if you take a look at them all together and make a recommendation to us, and we can go consider again.
Okay. Are we okay with finding?
Well, we're not, we're
Mr. Booker's contacted.
Well, if you're requesting additional, discussion information from us, we would just ask the opportunity to respond in writing to any memos or anything, and share with us whatever correspondence is out there. Again, the only thing that I received prior tonight was a GML. I did not receive Ms. Tolf's email. I did not receive the Cranny Drainage Agency. I did not receive any of those items.
Follow up with our clerk secretary, Lori. Walter, you'll send some kind of email or memo to the ZBA responding to the county. Now, just keep in mind that Mr. Carbon, in his letter, I gave a copy to Lori, Mr. Carbon gave a copy to Lori. His applicant, his client rather, is accepting several of those February 5 modifications in the county GML letter. So you don't need to address those.
Well, I'll get his as well, I'll know where I can.
Yeah, Lori has both. Yeah, so you can ignore some of them because the applicant is accepting a good number of them. So if you could, in particular, the flood administrator matters, and I think the Florida ratio matters seem to be in question or raised as some.
Well, just to be clear and just to help us move on, I think it's pretty well established, the FAR. It's just how we're going to deal with it. I mean, there's no exemption for anything except singles and twos that have basements 7, 6.
If that's the case, we'll get the findings on it.
Well, that's what the zoning board's for, right?
Okay, yeah, first we want to get your position on these issues, then after that, we want the attorney to give us legal findings. So that we can make it.
Well, I guess what I would ask, Mr. Chairman, is to the extent the building inspector is being requested to advise you on what he calculates the FAR to be and what he determines the floodplain issues to be, as well as any other open issues, we would ask that those determinations and advice be shared with us prior to the meeting so that we can share our perspective with you if it differs, and so that it could all be addressed by the board at one time.
Just may ask you in ignorance what you mean by findings. If it's a question as to how floor ratio is calculated, whether or not basements are included, the basement, square footage is included in the calculation of floor area, and in anything other than single two-family homes, I think that, like as Walter pointed out, that's defined in our code. So I would ask the building inspector, because that's his role, is to determine what the variances and nonconformities may be, the extent of the floor ratio, the front yard setbacks, height, etc. That's not the role of the attorney. So I'm not sure, it's outside my jurisdiction. Now, if Walter has a legal question for me as to the interpretation of a zoning regulation, that is my role, and that's my obligation, responsibility. So I asked Walter to look at the bulk table, in particular floor ratio, and make sure it's accurate as submitted by Anthony Celentano. If it's accurate, then let the ZBA know it's accurate. If it isn't accurate, then let the ZBA know. If you have any legal questions for me, that's why I'm here.
I will impart whatever the code states.
I say this because it's my understanding, when the county disapproves an item, in this case your proposed plans, then it requires, for this board to override it, requires majority plus one.
Absolutely.
So the more clarity we are given, the better we can make a determination, because you will need more than 3 votes for this.
You know me a long time, you know I know how to count.
I'm just checking, making sure you know that I
Haven't forgotten my math. Haven't forgotten my math.
All right, all right.
I would rather have more information than I
First-
need than less information.
First rule of being a zoning lawyer is knowing how to count.
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Application first.
are we okay to continue this?
If we're on for March 14th, I would just, if anything could be gotten to me by March 7th, just so I could respond.
Right, I'll ask Walter, do you think you can look through that GML? All right, so we're good for March 14th? All right, for all in attendance, the applicant has requested a continuation of the public hearing to March 14th, 7:00 p.m. here in this meeting room. And the public hearing shall remain open and continue to that date, time, and place. There will be no other public notices sent out other than the minimum required by the New York State Open Meetings Law. Is there a motion to that effect? You guys, there's a motion. There's a second, Lori.
Second, all in favor?
We don't have a clerk.
Yes, we're all in favor.
All in favor?
You all in favor?
Okay, We'll continue this to March 14th, and now we'll move to item number 5.